Hey, it's Drybear. The time is almost upon us. We're just over 2 days until Monster Hunter Wilds drop. So today I wanted to go through the best and worst weapons from the last few beta tests and the local tests they did in Japan to see where everything sits. Now, huge disclaimer on this. There's a bunch of things to know about weapons in beta tests like these. Number one, a lot of the weapons in Monster Hunter require a certain specific build or trait that helps them function properly. And in the fixed gear setup, for the betas that we've had, some weapons didn't have it, like having quick sheath for longsword that alters the sheath animation, having power prolonger for insect glaive, allowing you to spend more time DPSing and less time generating buffs, having things like ammo up for the bow guns or, you know, the power boosts for the bow. All of these things make a huge difference, or even just evade extender for the slow weapons like switch axe or lance or gunlance or greatsword. Those things make a big difference in your ability to position to the right spot and deal damage. So keep in mind, this is a big, huge grain of salt with this, but I want to talk about where the weapons were in the beta tests as far as clear time on Arkveld and, you know, right now and things like that, and what changes you can expect going into launch in 2 days, balance changes they've made in their version that are going to be coming out that no one really has played yet that will be changing the perspective of these weapons overall. And of course, I'm a huge advocate of just playing whatever weapon you enjoy the game. Don't worry about reviews, don't read anything, just jump into Monster Hunter Wilds, enjoy your time with it, play whatever weapon you want, and since you can have 2 weapons equipped now in Wilds, play with 2 weapons that you like and mix and match them and pull them together. A lot of people are using like a bow or a light bow gun in the offhand for range damage, or they're bringing out like a heavy bowgun or light bowgun to do the buff ammo that you can shoot and make yourself buffed as you go in, then you switch to your main weapons. There's a lot of options to go through, but I think this is just a good exercise to see where the weapons are now. Now we're going these in order of the fastest clear on Arkveld to the slowest clear on Arkveld in the last 2 beta tests. Now there are going to be a lot of these that go along with the environmental damage. I have separated these into clears that do not use the rockfall, because I feel like that kind of invalidates the comparison of weapon to weapon. However, the fastest clear that I can find without using rocks at all on Arkveld is using the bow. And unfortunately for the bow, and it shouldn't really be too much of an issue, but going into launch, the bow will be receiving some nerfs that weren't present in the beta test. So the big thing about the bow is that with the new focus system, you're able to lock on and have perfect shots with the new focus system and with the new magic archer ability. I call it that from Dragon's Dogma, but it basically brings the crosshair up, locks onto the targets, and does a bunch of damage. But because you're able to guarantee your hits without having to aim, it makes the damage of the bow very, very strong. They also have the really good dodge effect, which means you can avoid taking damage, and it gives you a lot of really good options for that. So going into the release, what they're doing is they're nerfing the tracer shots. So the focus system shots that are auto-targeted and the auto-aim through the magic archer skill, they're going to be reducing the damage of those and raising the damage of the normal shots and arc shots. And I think what they're trying to say is that they want you to be a little bit more intentional with your bow play, making sure you're aiming properly, dealing the damage direct up. So they're also doing that, and they're also going to be making it so that the tracer lock-on system, this one right here, the magic archer ability, they're making that lock-on slower with the release version, which means that if you played the beta, it'll lock on a little bit slower, like it'll take longer to get those lock-on targets for it. So you'll have to kind of wait through that. But in general, I think the bow is in a great spot. It's almost always in a great spot. We saw this with Rise, by the way, where if you add in a parry or a perfect dodge to the bow, it just becomes a crazy monster. You get the amount of stamina recovery, like you get all the buffs and the dash juice and everything that you need to keep your stamina up, which we didn't really have all of those in the beta. It means you can just stay right in front of the monster, dodge everything, avoid everything, and do crazy damage. So the bow was by and far the highest DPS of all the weapons, and it is seeing some nerfs to the tracer and the targeting system for the focus shot, but it is getting some buffs to counteract these nerfs with the normal shots and the arc shots for doing damage that you actually have to aim yourself, which hopefully brings it a little bit there as well. And they're doing some sweeping changes on some of the animations and things like that. So the bow will feel different from what the open beta is, but it is, of course, the highest clear time. The fastest one I found without rockfall is 4 minutes and 28 seconds on Arkveld. And remember that this beta, this is you using gear that is very much before Arkveld. Like you are under geared for Arkveld. Most people using using the beta gear would either not be able to clear Arcveld or would do it between 15 and 20 minutes. So this is highly optimized, and being super under geared without rockfall, still clearing a monster you're not supposed to fight yet in under geared and under performance, doing 4 minutes and 28 seconds is kind of crazy. So it's not surprising that the bow is getting nerfs. Next up is the heavy bowgun coming in second place. Now this has kind of always been the case. Heavy bowgun has always been, if you're able to position properly and you know the monster really well, heavy bowgun has almost always been the speed run weapon of choice, just because if everything lands and you line things up properly, you can do a ridiculous amount of damage with it. And one thing to note about this is, even though heavy bowgun is in the second spot for the best Arcveld solo without using rockfall that I found, was 5 minutes and 33 seconds. If you found a better one, let me know down below in the comments. But this one is 5 minutes, 33 seconds. Again, a crazy clear speed on this. And this is usually just finding the weakness that you need in this. And unlike light bowgun, the heavy bowgun doesn't need to use element weaknesses as much for the ammo types. And also, we didn't really have any major ammo buffs for the perks that you can add to it as well. And you also didn't have access to all the best ammo in the game, though they did give us a large amount of elevated normal ammo, which made a big difference for these as well. So nothing notable changing for heavy bowgun. What's cool about heavy bowgun in Wild is that it is one of the few weapons that can offset, and it can also do a clash mechanic, because you have all the heavy bowguns in Wilds have that shield on it. You can't do the long barrel that you could in some of the other monster hunters. So if you actually bring up your heavy bowgun at the right time, you can actually trigger a clash, just like the sword and shield, the lance, the gunlance, and the great sword can. But you also have the ability to offset if you use the right attack at the right time, and they have crazy damage as well. So heavy bowgun, even though being the second highest up here, not really receiving any major changes that are going to make a huge difference as far as I can tell going into the release, so it's still in a very good spot. Next up is the Gunlance, and this one is actually in a crazy spot. Now, I have not always been the biggest fan of Gunlance. I think Gunlance is actually one of the hardest weapons to master in the game. Some people will argue that it's Charge Blade or things like that, and I can definitely agree that Charge Blade is harder to learn, but once you know Charge Blade, whether you're playing with the Buzzsaw version or you're doing the Syed version, I would argue that Gunlance is definitely one of the hardest ones to learn, and especially depends on your shelling technique. If you're doing, normal shelling or whatever build you're going for. Now, one of the things that I was worried about Gunlance going into Wilds is that I actually really liked the blast jump, like Gundam move that you got in Rise, but it was a little too arcadey for the game. And actually what's interesting about this is that the Gunlance is in a very, very good spot. So the best Arcveld solo that I found without using rocks for Gunlance was 539, putting it in third place overall. And I actually think that Gunlance, even without being able to try all the different shelling techniques, different Gunlance options and everything on part of it, I think the combo connectors they added in Wilds, plus the focus system, like being able to drill into a target and do damage that way, and you can do clashes and offsets with it, makes a really huge difference for Gunlance, and the damage output is incredible. And because of this, they're not receiving, as far as I can tell, any major buffs or nerfs going into release. They're pretty much happy with where they are, at least internally on the local tests and the beta tests overall. So Gunlance is just going to be one of those good ones. You can use the crazy burst ammo, you can use normal ammo, you can use shelling technique, or you can use these crazy like combo connectors where you sweep up. It's not really like a full discharge or a full blast, but you can have combinations where you sweep into different attacks using the Gunlance, which I think makes it really, really fun and awesome to play. But obviously very powerful, very good to use. And this is before we even get different shelling techniques and different Gunlance options, or even have like, evade extender for or evade window to make the jumps a little bit easier to play around with. Overall, I think Gunlance is one of the biggest winners in the game in general, and is not receiving any major changes going into release in 2 days. Next up is the Charge Blade. The best I could find without using rocks is a 613 Arcveld solo, and Charge Blade I think is definitely in that category of doing really, really well. However, there was some feedback on generally the functionality of the Charge Blade, on how it feels to move and charge files and do your Syed, or even just use your Buzzsaw technique to be able to deal damage that way. And I think that, again, if we are going to be using the buzzsaw technique for the charge blade, it will rely a lot on elemental damage, and some of these weapons, like, you know, like dual blades or sword and shield, do need elemental damage to work properly, which we weren't really able to take advantage of in the beta, which changed these numbers up quite significantly. But there is one major change that they're making to the charge blade for the release that I think is going to make a big difference, and that is they're speeding up the transition animation for your charging and between, you know, changing between like your full charge up ability, your like sword and shield versus normal, and how you transition between the states of charge blade is getting faster. And I think that is the biggest complaint that people have had about charge blade in general. I think in general, the buzzsaw was the fastest clear time and the best DPS. But again, you know, we might see some better damage output for the Syed, the super amped elemental discharge and things like that coming out as we're able to change our gear and change our equipment to make a specific build for that in general. But no major changes for charge blade, still in a really good state. Filling up your files, switching over, doing damage, all works really well. You still have the guard points though. It doesn't really seem like you actually need to use the guard points in the beta. I'm not a huge like charge blade main. I play a little bit of charge blade in the betas, but in general, it doesn't seem like with the clash mechanic and the actual like perfect blocks that you have, it doesn't really seem like you even need to use guard points. If you're a charge blade main, let me know what you think about the charge blade in Wilds, but I didn't feel like I needed to actually rely on them as much as previous Monster Hunters, and it just seems like the charge blade is in a great spot overall, sitting at a 613 Arcveld solo without using rocks and with fixed gear in the betas. Next up is the longsword, and a weapon that honestly I expect nerfs to come out. I don't think I've seen anything majorly confirmed for longsword changes going into the launch, but I would expect some, because realistically, quick sheath is a major aspect of the longsword, and it's not something we really got to play with in the beta overall. So the builds for longsword are going to get significantly better once you have maxed out quick sheath and you have some other options for it. I have still seen ridiculous clear times for Arcveld with longsword, especially longsword in a group, multiple longswords doing ridiculous damage. The best one I've found so far was 624 for solo, no rockfall. However, I know Team Darkside has done some incredibly fast longsword clears on Arcveld and Ray Dow, so I don't know if you want to count those specifically, especially the ones done in groups, but as far as solo, this is the best clean kill without rockfall that I've seen, though there probably is better. Now, the changes that we're seeing for longsword going into the release is that we're going to get some improvements for the quick sheath and also gain access to quick sheath, which is going to make a massive difference for the weapon. And again, I do expect to see some damage nerfs to longsword, because if longsword is already in the top echelon for clear speed, even without the proper build and everything lined up properly, I feel like it's probably just going to be one of the best weapons in the game. Though, granted, it usually is one of the best weapons anyways, and there's definitely been some feedback around the longsword not even needing to do the helm splitter, like the falling damage attack, because the normal moves are so damaging already. But if you're a longsword main, let me know how you feel about the beta longsword and how it sits going into release. But I would expect, if you're someone who plays longsword, I would expect some minor to moderate nerfs going into the release, though I could be wrong about that depending on how longsword sits. But 624 solo without rocks that I've seen. I know Team Darkside did a faster one in a group. I don't know if they've done a solo one faster there as well, but the damage from the longsword is actually ridiculous, and this isn't even a complete longsword at all, so things are looking real good for longsword. Next up is one of my all-time favorite weapons. If you put together all Monster Hunters combined, I probably have the most amount of time on Insect Glaive more than any other weapon, and I honestly think that the Insect Glaive is probably the best version that it's going to be on launch that it's ever been, and it's had a very emotional, dramatic turn of events overall, because when they first started talking about the changes to Insect Glaive going into Wilds, they talked about how they're getting rid of the aerial maneuver, the bounce, the ability to juggle, and honestly, in past Monster Hunters, it wasn't even the best way to deal damage, but it was so iconic to the Insect Glaive. It's always been the weapon that allows you to do the mounting damage the easiest and just fly around in the area. So losing that at first was a big loss, but if you're an Insect Glaive main, you've been playing Insect Glaive, and you love that, just know that going into the launch, the aerial is back. They will be allowing up to 3 aerial bounces in the launch version of the game. It's not quite as much as the possible, I think it was 4 or 5 in Worlds, but it will be up to 3 in Wilds, on top of all the other things that Insect Glaive is getting. On top of that, they're buffing the Descending Slash and also allowing it to do more damage from aerial combos to try and make the aerial game a little bit more competitive in damage output to the ground game that we have. And they're also allowing offsets with it as well, though I don't think you can do clashes with the Insect Glaive at all, which is totally fine. However, the big wins for Insect Glaive, at least in my mind, is the focus system allowing you to instantly get all of your buffs right away. And this is necessitated not only for the fact that, you want to be able to play with your buffs active, and Insect Glaive requires at least your red buff to get your best damage moveset up, but also the fact that you can consume your buffs to do a upward tornado, an upward like whirlwind attack. I'm forgetting the names at this point, but the big attack you just saw, you can consume your buffs and then get them back quickly. So Insect Glaive in a very good spot. Insect Glaive has never been the fastest clear time. Usually like heavy Bowgun or greatsword have the insane damage output, but it getting a Arcveld solo of 748 without using rocks is still very strong, and the fact that you can move between these I think makes a very strong argument for this. And don't worry, again, if you're an Insect Glaive main and you like the aerial component, they are bringing that back for the release version of the game. You will be able to do 3 aerial bounces with the release version of the game in 2 days, so that is going to be there, and I think Insect Glaive is in an awesome spot. No longer do you have to do some cheeky beaky business where you shoot your Kinsect to the side and try to hit the back to get an orange buff to get your triple bonus. With the focus system, getting buffs is fast and easy. You have some spenders now as well. Descending Slash and Tornado Slash are both very strong, and you have the same ground game that you've always had for the Insect Glaive. Plus you have the Spinny Dervish finisher when you're on mounted damage, which looks really cool as you drill into them with it. All of it looks really, really fun. And again, this is a beta build that we didn't have full power prolonger on. A bunch of normal Kinsect buffs or stamina bonuses that you might use, or dash juice or anything like that. So Insect Glaive will get better with better gear and better builds. So overall, sitting about middle of the pack with the build, the beta build that we had, and only getting better with the release. Next up is the Hunting Horn, and I, just like the Insect Glaive, I think this is probably going to be one of the best versions of Hunting Horn that we've seen, mainly because they have easier ways to get through your melodies and move through your basic moveset, but they also have the deployable effects that you can put down on the ground with the bubbles. And I think that combined together creates a brand new experience for Hunting Horn that's going to make the weapon super strong. Now, typically, again, Hunting Horn not the fastest speedrunner, but has crazy options for utility, very strong in a group, and also does have some good KO potential like the hammer if used properly. The major change that we're getting going into release with the Hunting Horn is they're going to make an offset melody that deals slash damage. So if you wanted to be able to sever a little bit easier with the Hunting Horn, usually the blunt weapons have trouble severing tails and doing things like that, especially if you're playing solo. Usually you have to use consumables for that to do slashing damage. Like you get the tail completely broken all the way down, and then you do slashing damage with a thrown consumable to knock it off. But there will be some offset melodies that you can use for severing if you really want to with the Hunting Horn. And because you have these deployables on the ground that you can use, you can do some ridiculous things, like getting the enemy to fall down in a certain spot or using traps to get them stuck, and then using those ground melodies and those bubbles to be able to do some crazy things. And on top of that, you're able to do all the cool stuff you can in support, settings with groups, teammates, and things like that. So Hunting Horn, again, I would argue, at least personally for me, I think is one of the best versions we've seen of Hunting Horn. It combines all of the really cool things that we got from Rise, plus a whole bunch of quality of life aspects, faster melody transitions, and deployables on the ground. Just makes it so much more fun to play and more interesting, in my opinion, on top of everything that makes Hunting Horn great as well. So 752 puts it again middle of the pack for all the weapons for the Arcveld solo on the limited beta build that we had. Next up is one of the fan favorite weapons, the Greatsword. And the Greatsword is one of 2 weapons in the entire game, along with the heavy bowgun, that can not only offset by hitting the enemy or hitting the monster as they're attacking you to offset them and knock them back, but can also do the clash mechanic. the heavy bowgun and the greatsword are the only two weapons that can do both, which means you have some crazy options like the offset attack you saw there, and of course you can still do clashes as well, like you have a shielded weapon. So the clear for Arkfeld was around 758, like high 7s is what I saw, or low 8s for greatsword without using rockfall. And obviously the big thing about greatsword is being able to stack up a lot of like attack boost and like, you know, bonus damage when they're enraged and bonus damage when you're low HP to get the biggest hits in the game overall. And I think with full builds, greatsword is only going to get faster and faster and better and better. And generally there's going to be more consumables that greatsword users will use, like on wake up, or using more, you know, actual explosions and things like that, like barrels, to be able to play around with that as well. So 758 for the greatsword is absolutely wild. They still have their crazy shoulder tackle. They still have their crazy avoidance and being able to tackle through attacks. They have the ability to offset. They have the ability to clash. So you can really get some crazy damage numbers and go toe-to-toe with the monster, almost more so than you have been able to in most other Monster Hunters, except for maybe Sunbreak Rise Greatsword with all the parries that they got and the crazy shoulder tackle they had there. So Greatsword looking great. No notable changes that I can talk about for the Greatsword. It's just in a great spot, pun intended there. It's going to be doing excellent in the release. And again, once they get all their crazy amplified boosts with fully optimized builds, they're going to be, usually Greatsword has the highest single hit numbers, and if you line it up properly, can do some ridiculous damage. On top of that, they have some really good defensive options, aside from what we had previously in World, for example, going into that, on top of the focus system and the wound system and everything that goes along with it as well. So Greatsword, not really much to say. It doesn't seem like anything's going to be majorly changing in 2 days for the release. It's just in a great spot and will continue to be in that spot with release and beyond. Up next is one of my comfort picks. I always love the Lance ever since, you know, Monster Hunter, the original Monster Hunter. Even when you just do your triple pokes and you hop, it's still been one of my favorite weapons overall. It's so cozy and comfy, and I've always enjoyed the ability to just be right in front of the monster and trade blows with them. You know, especially across all titles, Lance is one of the few weapons that can just stay in front of the monster the entire time, and that's actually getting way better in Wilds for many reasons. So the fastest solo that I saw on Arkveld with just the basic setup that we had in the beta was around 8 minutes. 8:09 is the one you see on screen right now, and this is where the Lance is going to sit. However, there are even more offensive options for the Lance. They do have the ability to do the clash mechanic, which is really awesome. And again, this is without evade extender, which a lot of Lance builds use to cover more ground with the advancing attack that allows you to like guard and jump forward with that and give you more ground to cover as well. However, again, the clash mechanic you see here makes it a very offensive option. And they also have these little mini parries that if you're able to use your, like, it's kind of like a perfect guard, I guess. It's not really a guard point, it's a perfect guard. If you get the perfect guard properly, you will respond on that perfect guard with a actually surprisingly high damage shield bash. So you can see it right there. So if you actually perfect guard the hit, you'll shield bash, which means that not only can the Lance trade blows with monsters, but they're able to gain damage out of it, which has always been the biggest weakness of Lance in general. Usually, Lance is like the most defensive weapon in the game, but has the slowest clears because you just have so much animation involvement in trying to build with it. But now that we have a perfect guard and a clash that can not only react to the monster, but deal damage at the same time, and if you can actually, if they do a bite attack or a head attack, that shield bash has KO damage on it as well, which means you can KO the monster and stun them. It gives you crazy damage output on it as well. And on top of all of that feeling really good for the Lance, going into launch, we're going to be seeing some changes. So the charge counter allows guarding and can be chained into. So the perfect guard, the power guard, and the charge counter can all be chained into from other moves, which is something that is a huge game changer for the Lance as well, which means that you can go into normal combos, you can advance, you can do the charge attack that you see here, then you can go into your power guards, your perfect guards, your perfect, or your charge counters, and do extra damage that way, on top of the fact that you can do damage in between attacks with Clash and the Perfect Guard Shield Bash. Means that Lance is even more offensive than it's ever been in any other Monster Hunter. Lance is shaping up to be one of the biggest winners, I would say, and hopefully more people will take this as an opportunity to pick up Lance in general. And they're also going to allow Power Guard to charge to higher levels faster, just so you can just be able to use that more consistently. It's usually not a major problem as long as you know the moves really well. There's some monsters in the past, like Magnomolo, who just have crazy build-up times where you can't do your power guard in the time properly, but being able to charge up faster, plus all the other changes to Lance, make it a very good contender, and hopefully this makes more Lance mains out of people that are Monster Hunter fans, or even just people coming into the series for the first time. Next up is dual blades, and again, just like the light bowgun and the sword and shield, and even like the buzzsaw charge blade, dual blades has always been a fast attacking and usually reliant upon elemental bonuses or status building as well. And because you have a fixed build in the beta where you can't really change your gear that much, you have a couple presets to choose from and that's it, it means that weapons like dual blades are going to suffer a lot from that and will be much better in the launch version of the game. However, that being said, I still found an 835 Arcveld solo without using Rockfall on the dual blades, which is still incredibly strong. So we're going to see that. On top of everything else, there's some nice changes to the demon form and how you build up and swap between that. And again, even without all the nice benefits of like stamina consumption and dash juice and all the other bonuses you'll be able to get once the game is live and you can make your own build, on top of having like more ailment and elemental bonuses, I think makes the dual blades a really strong contender for people playing in Wilds as well. And on top of that, they have mentioned that they're going to be making some changes to dual blades going into release. They want to make it more powerful, so I think it's just across the board going to get a damage buff from its state from the beta. It means it's just generally going to do more damage. And they also are going to be adding in, they were kind of nondescript about this. I don't know what I trust on information for this one in general. They said that they're going to add in more strong ailment application to the dual blades, which is the translated version of their notes going into release. Now, this might mean that there's going to be some other ways to apply application, or they're just going to make the like coefficient for it to be higher in general. But I think in general, dual blades are going to function just like they did in the open beta and the beta tests, except they're just generally going to be better. Higher damage output, more ailment application, more element options, and you're going to be able to manage your stamina better because you'll have more buffs and more gear and more perks to go along with that as well. So on top of the fact that they weren't able to make an optimal build for dual blades, we still saw a sub 9-minute clear on Arcveld solo using the pre-built options. I think it's going to be a really cool option for that. I'm not super impressed with the wound system for the dual blades, but they don't really need it as much as some of the other options there. They can't offset, they can't do the counters like the clash mechanic, but they don't really need it either. And I think that the dual blades are going to be crazy strong on launch. And let me know if you're a dual blade fan or a dual blade main, what you think about the iteration of dual blades in Wilds. Up next is the hammer, and this is a weapon that I don't think is receiving any major changes in general. However, there have been some changes from past titles for the hammer. I think the ability to reposition with the grapple now is insanely powerful and also super fun. I've actually been having a blast with the hammer in general with the added mobility. You still have the move around while you're charging, but now you have this kind of like clutch claw. You can shoot the ground, grapple, and reposition, which is really cool. However, they did change the accessibility of the big bang and the golf swing and how those combos work. You still have some crazy damage output, but I think it ended up becoming a lot of this like wind up attack for optimal damage for the hammer. And I also will miss a lot of the like spinny dervish air attacks that we've had in previous titles, and also some of the wire bug options we had in Rise for the hammer as well. The fastest I was able to find was 847. There might be faster out there, but this is the only one I found without using rocks, and it kind of puts it towards the lower end of the damage output for this. But again, there's going to be some optimizations you can make with gear, though it's not going to be as notable as, say, power prolonger on insect glaive, ammo up or rapid up on some of the guns or bows, or even like having things like quick sheath on longsword making a massive difference in output, or even just like the major damage buffs on greatsword. So I don't think that hammer is going to get crazy faster with better gear, but it just will get along with the curve that every other weapon in the game. Though generally hammer is not the fastest killing weapon in the game, but it definitely is the highest KO option. And it's just wicked fun. Having more mobility over past versions of the hammer, I think, makes a really cool option. You still have the crazy knockout, knockdown potential of the hammer, and everything along the lines of being able to swap to a different weapon if you want to, and just being able to just bonk your way to destiny. The hammer has never been about pomp and circumstance. It's never been like the weapon for nobles. It's just easy, satisfying, straightforward, and all about just bonking and smashing everything in your way, and that's not changing for the hammer in general. But But for the beta, at least in the limited testing that we've had, it is on the slower end for clear speed on Arcveld, though that might change as we go into the launch and people discover new ways to use the hammer in general. Next up is probably my top 3 weapon. I have such a heavy love for Sword and Shield. It's always been one of my favorites. I love the back hop. I love the perfect rush combo. I love how mobile it is. And also, in a lot of ways, it feels like you're going into a dance. Like unlike the boxing match you have with the Lance or like the dodging fiesta you have with some of the faster weapons, I feel like Sword and Shield is much more of a dance, and that you can move when they attack and you advance, then you back up and you hop. And it's just so fun and flexible and unique with everything that goes along with it. And one thing that we should know about the Sword and Shield, though, we have an 852 Arcveld solo here is, as I've mentioned several times in the video already, Sword and Shield typically being a faster weapon is more reliant on element damage or ailment damage, which you haven't really been able to maximize in the beta in general. So you have to kind of keep that in mind, that this is going to be on the lower end, and while they are on the slower end of clears for Arcveld solo, it's something that will improve dramatically once we're able to get full builds for the Sword and Shield, because obviously the fixed gear and under gear representation for the Sword and Shield in the beta is not really how the Sword and Shield will normally be built, and so they're kind of underutilized in this beta build in general. But you still have the normal usual suspects there. You have the back hop, you have the falling hammer you see there, easy mount damage as well. You obviously have perfect rush, and the Sword and Shield, as far as I can tell, is getting some notable changes for the release as well. The first one is they're going to be improving the perfect rush in general, getting more damage, which is huge. It almost felt like you weren't really ever using the perfect rush to get the optimal damage out of the beta. But again, you know, suboptimal build and very specific constraints. Hopefully with more improvements to the perfect rush, we'll be able to use that as your primary damage output if you want to as well in general. So getting that improvement as well, getting more damage overall, even aside from not having elemental or ailment bonuses on top of that as well. And they're adding a couple more iframes to the backstep, which means you can play a little bit more aggressively and a little bit more forward with your positioning, because you can rely on those iframes on the back hop, which has always been a Sword and Shield mainstay, being able to hop at the right moment to, as I said, do that dance, that waltz with the monster. You hop to avoid a hit, you jump forward, do a perfect rush, then you do damage there as well. They can clash, which is awesome. It means they can use that little baby shield that they have to do clash mechanics, which is super fun. I think their wound mechanic is very strong and will get stronger with element and ailments as well, because it does have that down slash, like carving multi-hit that goes down, which I think is the highest damage output you could do in the beta in general. You still have the extra bonk KO option with the shield, which you can mix in with different combos, and with the falling bombshell when you do the jump combo, you go up into the air and you fall down with the shield. So I think in general, the Sword and Shield, even though it is on the lower end for the beta clears, it is getting some very big buffs going into release, and also we'll be able to do some really awesome optimizations with the build setup going into release as well. Next up is the light bowgun, which is usually one of the easier weapons in the game to use, especially in games like Rise, where they actually had a parry mechanic, which made it even crazier. On the slower end of damage output, though, again, unlike the heavy bowgun, which can usually just use, as long as you're using the correct ammo type, like pierce or spread, or even just have, you know, good normal damage on heavy bowgun, generally the light bowgun tends to rely a lot more on ailments and elemental damage. Like getting the right element and being able to burst damage with that on the light bowgun is exceptionally powerful. However, it does have some really cool options for burst damage. The worm stake in the ground still has great damage options as well. And even though it is one of the slower clearers in the beta generally set up, it does need some more bonuses. Like, again, you need to actually have the ammo up, the correct ammo type for the monster you're facing, and also just some general improvements for the gear and perks that you're using for the light bowgun in general. And hopefully this will just kind of see it rise up as you're able to take advantage of the full kit. Usually with a light bowgun, the light bowgun is very much like a survivalist kind of weapon. And what I mean by that is that the better you're able to farm materials ahead of time and use the right ammo type at the right monster in the right situation, the faster your clears get with light bowgun. And it also just has a lot of movement that you can use as well. So I think that because of that, the light bowgun will get better with launch, though keep in mind that I haven't seen any major major changes for the light bowgun going into release, which I actually had a typo on screen. It's nothing notable. There's nothing major changing with light bowgun. They're happy with where it's at. And again, once you have the right ammo types and you know what the weaknesses of the monster are and you can exploit it properly with the light light bowgun, I think the clear times will improve dramatically, and in general serves its purpose quite well. And I think there will probably be a lot of people using light bowgun in their offhand, separate from their main weapon, just to use to clear small monsters in the air, shoot other monsters down, interact with environmental effects, set up buffs areas that you can use for the special ammo or trank shots and things like that. In general, I think light bowgun is basically as good as it's always been, minus the crazy parry that they got in Rise, which made the weapon just ridiculously strong. Lastly, we have the switch axe in last place. Now, I have seen some like 5 to 7 minute clears on Arkveld with the switch axe, but every single one that I saw used a lot of the boulders, like the rock fall and things like that, environment damage, which again, I think invalidates the run as far as like comparing weapon to weapon, because that just means that the environment is very strong, and we already know that for wilds. I found this run here, which is a 1238 on Arkveld solo, using only the switch axe, no rock fall, no environment damage, no setups that way, just pure weapon. And this is the weapon that probably was in the weakest spot for the beta in general, and I think a lot of people can agree with that. Just in general, the beta, it felt like the switch axe lacked a lot of weight to it, a lot of heft, and a lot of power. It just didn't seem like it was doing as much damage as it should. So it is receiving some pretty big buffs going into the full launch, and if you are a switch axe main, I wouldn't worry. They're going to make it right. They're going to make good on it. It still feels good. It just doesn't feel like you're being rewarded as much as some of the other weapons in general. So for this, what they're doing is they're making it so that when you switch to sword mode, the animation is going to be improved, and it's going to be a little bit easier to do in general, just to make the transition from axe to sword a little bit more reliable and something that you can lean on when you're doing the combat in general, which should feel better for a lot of switch axe mains out there. They're also making the full release slash improved in several ways. They're making some of the hit windows a little bit cleaner. They're making the animation a little bit faster and snappier, and I think they're also making the damage on it significantly higher. So for full release, switching into sword mode and doing full release, I think is going to be really, really strong, and with some major buffs going into the launch. And they're also making a major change that I think made switch axe kind of a powerhouse in Rise specifically. They added a bunch of parry and elemental parries and things like that in Rise that made switch axe become one of the best weapons in the game overall. And for wilds, for the release version, if you played switch axe in the beta but haven't tried the wilds release version, they're adding in hyper armor. So there's going to be some knockback resistance in the full release animation, which means that if there's like medium to low knockback when you're doing full release, you will be able to ignore it, which is kind of what the greatsword does. So you'll be able to kind of just like forehead your way through some attacks using full release and time that as an option to be more offensive, on top of the faster animation switching into sword mode, the snappier animation on full release. Adding in the hyper armor is going to be a massive boon across the board, and switch axe hopefully will be returning to its former glory with the full launch of the game in general, on top of being able to fully optimize your build, get the right setup, and get everything put together outside of the beta build, which is quite limited in general. And that's where we're at for the best and worst weapons going into the launch of Monster Hunter Wilds. I hope you're just as excited as I am about the game in general. I cannot wait for a new Monster Hunter to come out and play. And let me know what you think about the weapon standings and which weapons you think are going to change with the release of the game as people get access to better gear and better options. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.